Fahrasa, or Biography of John Day by Madame Charlotte. Read by Christopher Nell, Esquire. Chapter 5. The Search for a Medium. Truth is within ourselves. It takes no rise from outward things. Whatever you may believe, there is an inmost center in us all, where truth abides in fullness, and around wall upon wall, the gross flesh hems it in. This perfect, clear perception, which is truth, a baffling and perverting carnal mesh, binds it and makes all error, and to know, rather, consists in opening out a way whence the imprisoned splendor may escape, than in effecting entry for a light supposed to be without. Browning, Paracelsus. D had always, working with and under him, a number of young students and assistants, who were admitted more or less to his inner counsels. If they proved apt and diligent, he would reward them with promises of alchemical secrets, whereby they might honestly live. Once he promised £100 to be paid as soon as my own clear hability I might spare so much. This was a very safe provision. Generous as he was, lavish to a fault, money never struck near him, nor was it of the least value in his eyes, except as a means of advancing science and enriching others. Naturally, jealousies arose among the assistants. They would suddenly depart from his service and spread ignorant and perverted reports of his experiments. Roger Cook, who had been with his master 14 years, took umbrage on finding himself barred from view of my philosophical dealing with Mr. Unrick. He had imagined himself the chosen confidant, for to him Day had revealed, December 28, 1579, what he considered a great alchemical secret of the action of the elixir of salt, 1/100. Roger was now 28, of a melancholic nature, and had been picking and devising occasions of just cause to depart on the sudden, for he was jealous of a newer apprentice. On September 7, 1581, Roger went for altogether from me. But it was not altogether, for Roger returned when Day was old and informed and poor, and remained serving him almost to the end. There was always something patriarchal in Day's care for the members of his large household, evidenced abundantly in his diary. No doubt their loyalty to him was often severely tried by harsh and cruel outside rumors, but as they knew and loved his real nature, they only drew closer towards him. A new phase of his character is now forced upon us. He has appeared hitherto as the man of learning, astronomer and mathematician, a brilliant lecturer and demonstrator, diligent in probing the chemical and alchemical secrets of which his vast reading, his foreign correspondence, and his unique library gave him cognizance. Interested in geographical discovery and history, a bibliographical and mathematical writer, his genuine contributions to science had been considerable. He had written upon navigation and history, logic, travel, geometry, astrology, heraldry, genealogy, and many other subjects. He had essayed to found a national library and was contemplating a great work upon the reformation of the calendar. But these purely legitimate efforts of his genius were discounted in the eyes of his contemporaries by the absurd suspicions with which his name had been associated ever since his college days. After his arrest and trial by Bonner, he never really succeeded in shaking off this savoir of something magical. The popular idea of day in league with evil powers was, of course, the natural result of ignorance and dull understanding. To a public reared in superstition, untrained in reasoning, unacquainted with the simple laws of gravitation, the power to raise heavy bodies in the air at will, to see pictures in a simple crystal globe, or converse with projections of the air, to forecast a man's life by geometric or planetary calculations, and to discern the influence of one chemical or mineral substance upon another, seemed diabolically clever and quite beyond human agency. Even to study nature and her secrets was to lay oneself open to the suspicion of being a magician. We must remember that in the early years of Queen Elizabeth's reign it was thought necessary to pass an act of Parliament decreeing that all who practiced sorcery, causing death, should suffer death. If only injury was caused, imprisonment and the pillory would be the punishment. Any conjuration of an evil spirit was to be punished by death as a felon, without benefit of clergy or sanctuary. Any discovery of hidden treasure by magical means was punishable by death for a second offense. But if magic was tottering on its throne, the reign of alchemy was still uncontested. Belief in it was universal. Its great votaries in the past were of all nations. Belief in it was universal. Its great votaries in the past were of all nations. St. Dunstan of Glastonbury, Roger Bacon, Raymond Lully, Canon George Ripley of Brightlington, Canon George Ripley of Brightlington, Albertus Magnus, Cornelius Agrippa, Arnaud de Villanova, and Paracelsus. All their writings and hundreds of others Dee had in his library and constantly upon his tongue. Alchemy was not only a science, it was a religion and a romance. It was even then enduring the birth throes of sickly infancy, of modern chemistry, and the alchemist's long search for the secret of making gold has been called one of its crises. Long after this, it was still an article of faith that such a man as Robert Boyle did not deny. We cannot forget that even that great chemist, Sir Humphrey Davy, reverenced the possibility and refused to say that the alchemist's belief in the power to make gold was erroneous. How unlike Dante's keen irony of the dark and groping man who seek to peltro or tin whitened with mercury. But alchemy was bursting with many other secrets beyond the manufacture of gold. The spiritual element abounding in all minerals, and the symbolism underlying every actual substance were deeply embedded in it. It was a science of ideals. It ever leads its followers on to scale illimitable heights of knowledge. For in order to surpass all material and rational nature and attain the crowning end, did not God delegate his own powers to the sage? So the art of healing was thought the noblest, the most godlike task. And no means of attaining Hermetic wisdom was untried. The physical, the psychical world became every bit as real, to these religious mystics as the physical and rational, which they understood so vaguely. Even the strange shapes which escaped the retorts of the old alchemists were known to them as souls. Their successors called them spirits. Paracelsus named them as Mercury, and it was left to his pupil, van Helmont, the true founder of all modern chemistry, to give the name of gas. It is easy to see how Dee, the astrologer, grew into close touch with these psychic phenomena, which, though they have become extremely familiar to us, as yet continue to baffle our most scientific researchers. When he first became conscious of his psychic powers and how far he himself was mediumistic, is harder to discern. It is on May 25, 1581, that he makes in his diary the momentous entry: I had Satan Cristallo offered me, and I saw. I had Satan Cristallo offered me, and I saw. I had Satan Cristallo offered me, and I saw. We may take it that he saw through a medium, for he never afterwards seems to have been able to scry without one. Perhaps his first crystal had then been given him, although, as we have seen, he already owned several curious mirrors, one said to be of Mexican obsidian, such as was used for toilet purposes by the ancient race. He had made a study of optics, and in his catalogue of the manuscripts of his library are many famous writings on the spectrum, perspective and burning glasses, etc. Then came the trouble with Roger, his incredible doggedness and ungratefulness against me to my face, almost ready to lay violent hands on me. Dee hears a strange rapping and knocking in his chamber. A gentleman came from Lewisham to consult him about a dream many times repeated. Day prays with him, and his dream is confirmed and better instruction given. A mysterious fire breaks out for the second time in the maiden's chamber at night. The knocking is heard again, this time accompanied with a voice repeated 10 times. No words, apparently, but a sound like the screech of an owl, but more longly drawn and more softly, as it were in my chamber. He has a strange dream of being naked, in my own skin, all over wrought with work like. He has a strange dream of being naked, and my skin all over wrought with work like the arms in a wreath. Again, he has a strange dream of being naked, and my skin all over wrought with work like some kind of tuft mocado, with crosses blue and red, and on my left arm, about the arm, in a wreath, these words I read: Sine mi nihil potestis facere, which translates to, separados de mí no pueden hacer nada, or, apart from me you can do nothing. And another the same night of Mr. Secretary Walsingham, Mr. Candish, and myself. Then he was 10 days from home, with John Brown, to hear and see the manner of the doings. Then he was 10 days from home at Snetgreen with John Brown to hear and see the manner of the doings. Evidently some remarkable manifestation. He was becoming more interested in psychic problems, but he was not able to proceed without a medium, and the right one had not yet appeared. Meanwhile, he fills his diary with all manner of interesting news. Vincent Murphy, the cozener, who had defamed him, and again whom in September 1580 he had instituted a troublesome lawsuit, was condemned by a jury at Guildhall to pay £100 damages. With much ado, I had judgment against him. 5 or 6 months later, he agreed with Mr. Godolspin to release the cozener. Jean Bodin, the famous French writer on witches and publicist, had come to England with Monsieur, and D was introduced to him by Gasselnau, the French ambassador, in the Chamber of Presence at Westminster. Later came from Dr. Andreas Hess, the occult philosopher, sent through Day's friend, Richard Hesketh, agent at Antwerp. There are also letters from Rome. John Leonard Haller of Hallerstein by Worms came to him to say he had received instructions for his journey into Qingse, or northern China, which journey I moved him unto, and instructed him plentifully for observing the variation of the compassion all places as he passed. He notes, as if it were a common occurrence, a foul falling out between 2 earls at court, Leicester and Sussex, the Lord Chamberlain, tells how they called each other traitor, whereupon both were commanded to keep to their chambers at Greenwich, where the court was. It sounds like a schoolboy's quarrel, but the royal schoolmistress would have them both know that they were in disgrace for a time. In July there was an eclipse of the moon, but it was cloudy, so I could not perceive it. In August, about 8:30, on the night of the 26th, a strange meteor, in form of a white cloud crossing Galaxium, lay north and south over our zenith. Then this cloud was at length from southeast to southwest, sharp at both ends, and in the west it was forked for a while. It was about 60 degrees high. It lasted an hour. All the sky clear about and far star shine. Dee made a journey into Huntingdonshire by St. Neots to Mr. Hickman's at Shookborough in the county of Warwick. Young Bartholomew Hickman was afterwards to become the companion and servant of his old age, and manifested some slight mediumistic powers. On the way home, a month or 2 later, Day rode into Sussex to Chailey, probably to get glass worked there. The Queen and Monsieur were at Whitehall. A pretty little scene was enacted at Mortlake at the New Year, when Arthur D. and Mary Herbert, they being but 3-year-old, the eldest of them, did make as it were a show of childish marriage, of calling each other husband and wife. Then Day essays a harmless little play upon words. The first day Mary Herbert came to her father's house at Mortlake. The second day she came to her father's house at East Sheen. Mrs. Day went the same day to see the baby Catherine at Nurse Garrett's, and Mistress Herbert went with her. So the two families were in great unity. Sir George Peckham, who sailed with Sir Humphrey Gilbert, came to consult Day about exploration in North America and promised a share in his patent of the new lands. He also sent down his sea master, Mr. Clement, and another gentleman, Mr. Ingram, to see the mathematician. For Sir John Killigrew, they devised a way of protestation to save him harmless for compounding for the Spaniard who was robbed. He promised me fish against Lent. Haller came again to get instruction how to transfer his money to Nuremberg and to get letters of introduction to Constantinople. By him, they sent letters to correspondents in Venice, where the German explorer was to winter. Mr. Newberry, who had been in India, came early in the new year. Day recounts how the stage in that well-known old London place of amusement, the Paris Garden, or Bankside Southwark, fell down suddenly while it was crammed with people beholding the bear baiting. Many people were killed thereby, more hurt, and all amazed. The godly expound it as a due plague of God for the wickedness there used, and the Sabbath day so profanely spent. Sunday was the great day for the bear fights. Notes: 1583, January 23rd, Mr. Secretary Walsingham came to my house, where by good luck he found Mr. Aldrian Gilbert, and so talk was begun on Northwest Straits discovery. January 24, Mr. Aldrian Gilbert and John Davis went by appointment to Mr. Secretary, to Mr. Beale his house, where only we four were secret, and we made Mr. Secretary privy of the Northwest Passage, and all charts and rudders were agreed upon in general. February 3rd, Mr. Saville, Moore Powell the younger, travelers, Mr. Alchemy, his son, came to be acquainted with me. February 4, Mr. Edmunds of the Privy Chamber, Mr. Lee, Sir Harry Lee, his brother, who had been in Moscovia, came to be acquainted with me. February 11, the Queen, lying at Richmond, went to Mr. Secretary Walsingham to dinner. She, coming by my door, graciously called me to her, and so I went by her horse side as far as where Mr. Hudson dwelt. February 18, Lady Walsingham came suddenly to my house very freely, and shortly after that she was gone. Came Sir Francis himself and Mr. Dyer. March 6, I and Mr. Adrian Gilbert and John Davis did meet with Mr. Alderman Barnes, Mr. Townsend and Mr. Young, and Mr. Hudson about the Northwest Passage. March 17, Mr. John Davies went to Chelsea with Mr. Adrian Gilbert to Mr. Radforth's, and so the 18th day from thence to Devonshire. April 18, the Queen went from Richmond toward Greenwich, and at her going on horseback, being new up, she called for me by Mr. Rowley, his putting her in mind, and she said, "Quod defertur non uffertur," and gave me her right hand to kiss. The Latin translates as "the inevitable is imminent," or "that which is postponed is not dropped." While these everyday events were going on and being chronicled, Day was also occupying himself with the search for a medium. He first tried one named Barnabas Saul. He seemed to have been a licensed preacher who professed himself an occultist. Saul gives news of buried treasure, great chests of precious books hidden somewhere near Oundle in Northamptonshire, but the disappointed book lover finds the hoard an illusion. Then Saul, who slept in a chamber over the hall at Mortlake, is visited at midnight by a spiritual creature. The first real seance that day records, Actio Solina, took place on December 21st, 1581. The scryer was bidden to look into the great crystalline globe, and a message was transmitted by the angel Anael through the percipient to the effect that many things should be declared today, not by the present worker, but by him that is assigned to the stone. After New Year's tide, on any day but the Sabbath, the stone was to be set in the sun. The brighter the day, the better. And sight should be given. The sitters might deal both kneeling and sitting. When we consider how very real to a devout person in the Middle Ages apparitions of the devil and of evil spirits were, there seems nothing at all extraordinary in Day's belief that good spirits also might be permitted to come to his call for purposes of good. A month or two after this, Saul was indicted on some charge and tried in Westminster Hall, but thanks to Mr. Serjeant Walmesley and a couple of clever lawyers, he was acquitted. There was an end of his clairvoyance, however. He confessed he neither heard or saw any spiritual creature any more. If the accusation against him had been that of sorcery, he was wise to risk no further appearances in Westminster Hall. He seems to have spread abroad many false reports about Day, who reproached him bitterly when he called at Mortlake a few months later. Day had, however, gained psychical experience by these early and tentative experiments. The field was now open for a mature applicant. When he arrived, he was to change the whole current of Dee's life and outlook, to become at once a helper and a stumbling block, a servant and a master, loving as a son, treacherous as a jealous foe. It was a strange fate that sent Edward Kelly to Dee at this moment, when everything was ripe for his appearance. And it was characteristic of the man that he was ushered into Day's life under a feigned name. On March 8, 2 days after Saul had confessed he saw and heard no more of the spirits, Dee writes in his diary, "Mr. Clarkson and his friend came to my house." He makes the visit very emphatic by repeating the information. Barnabas went home about 2 or 3 o'clock. He lay not at my house now. He went, I say, on Thursday, and Mr. Clarkson came. At 9 o'clock the same night, there was a wonderful exhibition of the aurora in the northern and eastern heavens, which Day describes minutely in Latin in the diary. The next day, March 9, he mentions Clarkson's friend by name as Mr. Talbot, and shows how this individual appears to have begun ingratiating himself with his new patron by telling him what a bad man his predecessor was. Barnabas had said that Day would mock at the new medium. Barnabas had cozened both Clarkson and Day. are co-signed, both Clarkson and Day. This Talbot professed to have been told by a spiritual creature. The pair proceeded at once to business. On the 10th, they sat down to gaze into my stone in a frame given me of a friend, with very remarkable results. Information was vouchsafed that they should jointly together have knowledge of the angel, if the will of God, vis-a-vis conjunction of mind and prayer between them, be performed. They were bidden to abuse not this excellency, nor overshadow it with vanity, but stick firmly, absolutely, and perfectly in the love of God for his honor together. There were 49 good angels, all of their names beginning with B, who were to be answerable to their call. The first entry that Day makes in his book of mysteries concerning Talbot is as follows. One Mr. Edward Talbot came to my house, and he being willing and desirous to see or show something in spiritual practice, would have had me to have done something therein. And I truly excuse myself therein, as not in the vulgarly accounted magic, neither studied or exercised, but confess myself long time to have been desirous to have help in my philosophical studies through the company and information of the blessed angels of God. And thereupon I brought forth to him my stone in the frame, which was given me of a friend. And I said unto him that I was credibly informed that to it, after a sort, were answerable alique angeli boni, and also that I was once willed by a scryer to call to the good angel Anael to appear in that stone in my own sight, and therefore I desired him to call him, and if he would, Anacor and Anilos likewise, accounted good angels, and I was not prepared thereto. He, Talbot, settled himself to the action, and on his knees at my desk, setting the stone before him, fell to prayer and entreaty, etc. In the main space, I in my oratory did pray and make motion to God and his good creatures for the furthering of this action. And within 1/4 of an hour or less, he had sight of one in the stone. The one to appear was Uriel, the spirit of light. On the 14th, the angel Michael appeared, and gave Day a ring with a seal. Only on 2 other occasions does a tangible object pass between them. Day was overjoyed at the success of his new speculator or scryer. The sittings were daily conducted until March 21, when the medium was overcome with faintness and giddiness, and Michael, who was conversing with him, bade them rest and wait for a 1/4 of an hour. The next day, Talbot departed from Mortlake, being bidden by Michael to go fetch some books of Lord Monteagle's, which were at Lancaster, or thereby, and which would else perish. He returned before long, and all through April instructions were being given at the sittings for the future revelations. Elaborate preparations were needed, and they were described in minute detail. By April 29, a square table, the table of practice, was complete. It was made of sweet wood, and was about 2 cubits high. By 2 cubits I mean our usual yard, with 4 legs. On its sides, certain characters, as revealed, were to be written with sacred yellow oil, such as is used in churches. Each leg was to be set upon a seal of wax made in the same pattern as the larger seal, sigilla amuth, or sigilla ameth, which was to be placed upon the center of the table. This seal to be made of perfect, that is, clean, purified wax, 9 inches in diameter, 27 inches or more in circumference. It was to be an inch and a half. It was to be an inch and half, a quarter of an inch thick, and upon the underside was to be a figure well known. It was a mystical sign, similar to those in use in the East, and also used by contemporary astrologers. Maybe even the unicursal hexagram. The 4 letters in the center are the initials of the Hebrew words, "Thou art great forever, O Lord," which were considered a charm in the Middle Ages. The upper side of the seal was engraved with an elaborate figure obtained in the following manner. First, a table of 49 squares was drawn and filled up with the 7 names of God, names not known to the angels, neither can they be spoken or read of men. These names bring forth 7 angels, the governors of the heavens next unto us. Every letter of the angels' names bringeth forth 7 daughters. Every daughter bringeth forth 7 daughters. Every daughter her daughter bringeth forth a son. Every son hath his son. The seal was not to be looked upon without great reverence and devotion. It is extremely curious and interesting to relate that 2 of these tablets of wax, sigillum Dei, and 1 of the smaller seals for the feet of the table, with a crystal globe, all formerly belonging to Dei, are still preserved in the British Museum, having come there from Sir Thomas Cotton's library, where the table of practice was also long preserved. The spirits were kind enough to say, "We have no respect of colors," but the table was to be set up on a square of red silk, as changeable, in essence shot as may be, 2 yards square, and a red silk cover, with knops or tassels. All the 4 corners was to be laid over the seal, and to hang below the edge of the table. The crystal glove in its frame was then to be set upon the center of the cover, resting on the seal with the silk between. The scribe seated himself in the green chair at the table, Dei at his desk to write down the conversations. These were noted by him then and there at the time, and he is careful to particularize any remark or addition told him by the checker afterwards. Once a spirit tells him, "There is time enough, and we may take leisure," whereupon Dei conversed directly with the visitant. Sometimes apparently only Talbot hears and repeats to him what is said. A golden curtain was usually first seen in the stone, and occasionally there was a long pause before it was withdrawn. Once Dei writes, "He taketh the darkness and wrappeth it up, and casteth it into the middle of the earthen globe." The spirits generally appeared in the stone. but sometimes they swept down into a dazzling beam of light from it and moved about the room. On some occasions, a voice only is heard. At the close of the action, the black cloth of silence is drawn, and they leave off for the present. There are very few comments or general impressions of the actions left by day, but on one occasion he does use expressions that show his analytical powers to have been actively at work to account for the phenomena. He brought his reason to bear upon the means of communication with the unseen world in a remarkable manner. In speaking to the angels one day, he said, I do think you have no organs or instruments apt for voice, but are mere spiritual and nothing corporal, but have the power and property from God to insinuate your message or meaning to ear or eye, so that man's imagination shall be that they hear and see you sensibly. As Plotinus says, not everything which is in the soul is now sensible, but it arrives when it proceeds as far as sense. The minute descriptions of the figures seen are of course characteristic of clairvoyant or mediumistic visions. In the case of Babajil, the account of his sage and grave attire, the common dress of a serious gentleman of the time, may be quoted. They that now come in are jolly fellows, all trimmed after the manner of nobilities, nowadays with gilt rapiers and curled hair, and they bragged up and down. Bulbagle standeth in a black velvet coat, and his hose close round hose of velvet upper stocks, overlaid with gold lace. He hath a velvet hat cap with a black feather in it, with a cape on one of two shoulders, his purse hanging at his neck, and so put under his girdle, his beard long. He had pantofoils and pinsons. 7 others are apparelled like Bulbagle, sagely and gravely. Chapter 6. Edward Kelly. Kelly did all his feats upon the devil's looking glass, a stone where, playing with him at Bo Peep, he solved all problems, never so deep. Butler, Hudibras. It is now time to inquire who this Talbot, the seer and medium, was. Where did he come from, and what was his previous history? That he came to the Mortlake philosopher under a feigned name is perhaps not so damning an accusation as might at first sight appear. There was in his case certainly every reason why he should change his identity, if possible, but an alias in those days was so common a thing that perhaps more stress has been laid upon Kelly's than is strictly fair. The whole of Kelly's story is so wildly and romantically colored, it is so incredible and so full of marvels that it is extremely difficult to know what to believe. There is no disentangling the sober facts of his life from the romance attributed to him. Indeed, there are no sober facts, as the reader will see when the accepted traditions of this extraordinary man's career are laid down. From March 8 to November 1582, Edward Talbot, the scryer, came and went in the Mortlake establishment, gazed in the crystal, and ingratiated himself into his employer's liking. Then he disappeared, and Edward Kelly took his place. There had been a quarrel of some kind, precursor of many others, and Day opens his fourth book of mysteries on November 15, after the reconciliation with Kelly. Henceforth, E.K. is his name. Kelly was born at Worcester on August 1, 1555, as appears by the horoscope drawn for him by the astrologer. He began life as an apothecary's apprentice and showed some aptitude for his calling. It has been stated that under the name of Talbot, he studied for a short time at Oxford, but left abruptly under a cloud. A few years later, he was exposed in the pillory in Lancaster. For having either forged ancient title deeds or coined base money. Both feats are accustomed to him. The next incident in his career is a charge of having dug up a newly buried caitiff's corpse in Walton-le-Dale churchyard, Lancashire, for the purpose of questioning the dead, or an evil spirit speaking through his organs, respecting the feature of a noble young gentleman, then a minor. After this savory episode, Kelly is reported to have been wandering in Wales. It is suggested that he was hiding from justice when he stumbled accidentally upon an old alchemical manuscript and two caskets or phials containing a mysterious red and white powder. Another version of this discovery is that Dee and Kelly together found the powder at Glastonbury. This we may dismiss. Wherever he procured it, Kelly undoubtedly owned a small quantity of some substance which he regarded as of priceless value, inasmuch as, if properly understood and manipulated, it could be used for transmitting baser metals into gold. The reputation of the learned doctor of Mortlake, who was known all over the continent, was a favorite at court, and in touch with every adventure by sea or land, had of course reached Kelly. Dee's personage of Upton-on-Severn, near Worcester, did not trouble him much with responsibility, but it must have been on one occasional visit to it that he received from the Dean of Worcester Cathedral a Latin volume, in which he inscribed the gifts thus: Johannes Day, 1565, February 21, Vigornia ex dono decani ecclesia magistri veder. With the powder that he did not know how to use, in the alchemical manuscript which he could not decipher, and which yet contained the invaluable secret, if indeed there is any truth in the story of his find, Kelly, the adventurer, sought out some means of introduction to the man so likely to help him. He had dabbled in alchemy, and came to Mortlake with something of a reputation, for Dee speaks of him as that learned man. It is utterly unlikely that Dee had heard anything of Kelly's exploits in the north. Such doings would scarcely penetrate the Solman recesses of the laboratory on the Thames side. So Barnabas had cozened him, tricked, and seemed to have at once impressed himself favorably upon the astrologer, who at the moment was without a reliable assistant. The sittings began, Zen sittings, as we have seen in March, and were successful immediately, and made the message came that none shall enter into the knowledge of these mysteries but this worker, and Kelly's position is secured. Kelly was now about 27 years old and unmarried. He was bidden by the spirits on April 20 to take a wife. Which thing to do, he told Day. I have no natural inclination, neither with a safe conscience may I do it. But Michael had made him swear on his sword to follow his counsel. So he married reluctantly. Not long after, Joan, or Johanna, Cooper of Chipping Norton, who was 8 years his junior and about 19. There was little love on his side apparently, but the girl seemed at any rate to have essayed to do her duty as a wife. She was apparently a complete stranger to the Days, although soon to become part of their household. What were Jane's feelings at the thought of this invasion of her domestic peace, we can only guess from an entry in Day's diary made 2 days after one of these first sittings. Day does not write much about his wife in his diary, save only entries related to her health, and this one he has carefully erased, as if he thought some disloyalty to her was involved in it. It is, however, possible to make it out almost entirely. 1582, 6 May, Jane, in a marvelous rage. At 8 o'clock at night, and all that night, and next morning till 8, of the cloak, melancholy, and chided me terribly for something illegible follows, and then this, that come to me only honest and learned men. Finally, by Mr. Clarkson, his help was pacified. What can this mean, save that she had taken violent dislike to, and disapproval of, Kelly, that she mistrusted his honesty, and wished they might have no more to do with him, that it was only by his friend Clarkson's help that she was at last quieted. Her woman's intuition was scarcely at fault, however kindly she came to treat her husband's medium afterwards. However charitable she showed herself, she was right in suspecting no good to come today through association with Kelly. The accounts of the actions with the spirits which took place under Kelly's control were minutely written down by Day, as we have seen, mostly during the time of the sittings. The papers had a romantic history. The last 13 books, which were in Sir Thomas Cotton's library, were printed by Dr. Merrick Casaubon about 50 years after Day's death, under the title of A True and Faithful Relation of what passed for many years between Dr. John Day, a mathematician of great fame, and Queen Elizabeth and King James their reigns, and some spirits, tending, had it succeeded, to a general alteration of most states and kingdoms in the world, with a preface confirming the reality as to the point of spirits of all this relation, and showing the several good usage that a sober Christian may make of all. Folio 1659. Casaubon, in his learned preface, maintains stoutly that the visions were no distempered fancy, that Day acted throughout with all sincerity, but that he was deluded. His book sold with great rapidity. It excited so much controversy and incurred such disapproval from Owen, Pye, and the other Puritan divines that it came near being suppressed. Only the excellent demand for it prevented its confiscation, for not a copy could be found. The True Relation contains the record of all actions after the beginning of June 1583. The earlier conversations from the first with Barnabas and Talbot's appearance on the scene are still to be found in manuscript. They have in some way parted company from those of which Cotton had possession. These earlier papers were acquired by the antiquary Elias Ashmole in a rather romantic way. Ashmole had been visiting William Lilly, the astrologer, at Horsham in August 1672, when on his return his servant brought him a large bundle of Day's autograph manuscripts, which a few days before he had received from one of the warders of the tower. The warder called on Ashmole at the excise office and offered to give them in exchange for one of Ashmole's own printed works. The Windsor Herald cheerfully agreed and sent him a volume fairly bound in gilt on the back, of which of his works we know not. Now for the history of the papers. Mrs. Well, the warder's wife, had brought them with her dower from her lamented first husband, Mr. Jones, confectioner of the Plough, Lombard Street. While courting, these young people had picked up the journers in Addle Street a large chest whose very good lock and hinges of extraordinary neat work took their fancy. It had belonged, said the shopman, to Mr. John Woodall, surgeon father of Thomas Woodall, surgeon to King Charles II, and Ashmole's friend. He had brought it probably at the sale of these effects in 1609, after his death. The Joneses owned the chest for 20 years without a suspicion of its contents. Then, on moving it one day, they heard a rattle inside. Jones prized open the space between the till and discovered a large secret drawer stuffed full of papers and a rosary of olive wood beads with a cross, which had caused the rattle. The papers proved to be the conferences with angels from December 22nd, 1581, down to the time of the printed volume. The original manuscripts of the unprinted books entitled 48 Claves Angelicae de Heptarchia Mystica and Liber Scientia Ox Illus et Victore Terrestris. We may imagine Ashmole's excitement when he found he had in his hand the earlier chapters of the very remarkable book that was still in everyone's mouth, published only 13 years before. We may now briefly examine this remarkable and voluminous book of mysteries, in view of the fact that it is perhaps the earliest record of mediumistic transactions. The first attempt to relate consecutive psychic transmissions, in fact, a sort of 16th century proceedings of a society for psychical research, it seems to warrant investigation at some length. The first book, still in manuscript, opens with a Latin invocation to the Almighty, and an attribution of all wisdom and philosophy to their divine original source. It ends, O beata et super benedicta omnipotens trinitas, concedas mihi Ioanni de Christopher Neal, petitionem hane modu tale que tibi maxime placibit. Amen. Amen. Then comes a table of the four angels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, also called Uriel or Verevia, their particular attributes and their descent from Anael. A long prayer in English follows, which gives a remarkable insight into Day's attitude of mind. Unfeigned humility towards God, a certain unconsciousness of self and of his own particular acquirements, are mingled with a calm assumption of authority and power to enter into the heart of knowledge. This was perhaps the chief characteristic of the exalted mysticism so prevalent at the time in a small section of alchemists, especially on the continent. Day was its representative in England, having of course imbibed much of it during his residence abroad. Paracelsus had been dead but 40 years. His disciples everywhere were seeking three secrets which were to fulfill his teachings: the secret of transmutation, the elixir of life, and the philosopher's stone. Key to all wisdom. Bruno was still alive, developing his theories of God as the great unity behind the world and humanity. Copernicus was not long dead, and his new theories of the solar system were gradually becoming accepted. Galileo was still a student at Pisa, his inventions as yet slumbering in his brain. Montaigne was writing his gentle satires on humanity. Everywhere and in every sphere, new thought was beginning to stir. Day did not scruple to claim in his prayer gifts like those bestowed upon the prophets. He deprecates any kind of traffic with unauthorized or unreliable spirits and acknowledges again the only source of wisdom. But since he has so long and faithfully followed learning, he does not think it important that he should know more. The blessed angels, for instance, could impart to him things of at least as much consequence as when the prophet told Saul, the son of Kish, where to find a lost ass or two. A spirit afterwards told him that ignorance was the nakedness wherewith he was first tormented, and the first plague that fell into man was the want of science. He had reached that state of mind when he seemed unable to discern any boundary line between finite and infinite. His hope and his confidence were alike fixed or nothing less than wresting all the secrets of the universe from the abyss of knowledge, or at any rate, as many of them as God willed. He explains, from his youth up, he has prayed for pure and sound wisdom and understanding, such as might be brought under the talent of my capacity to God's honor and glory and the benefit of his servants, my brethren and sisters. And forasmuch as for many years in many places far and near, in many books in sundry languages, I have wrought and studied, and with sundry men conferred, and with my own reasonable discourse labored, whereby to find or get some yinkling, glimpse or beam of such the aforesaid radical truths, and seeing I have read in thy books, and records how Enoch, Hanuk, enjoyed the favor in conversation. With Moses thou wast familiar, and also that to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joshua, Gideon, Esdras, Daniel, Tobit, and sundry others. The good angels were sent by thy disposition to instruct them, inform them, help them, yea, in worldly and domestical affairs, yea, and sometimes to satisfy their desires, doubts, and questions of thy secrets. And furthermore, considering the show stone which the high priest did use by thy own orderage, wherein they had light and judgment in their great doubts, and considering also that thou, O God, didst not refuse to instruct the prophets then called seers, to give answers to common people of things economical, as Samael for Saul, seeking for his father's asses, being gone astray, and as other things vulgar, true predictions, whereby to win credit unto their weightier affairs. In thinking within myself the lack of thy wisdom to me to be of more importance then the value of an ass or two could be to Cis, Saul, his father. And remembering what good counsel thy apostle James giveth, saying, Sices autum vestrumet, meaning, work is required to succeed, or prayer without work is in vain, or everything has its origin in something. And that Solomon the wise did so, even immediately by thyself, attain to his wonderful Pseudomy. Therefore, seeing I was sufficiently taught and confirmed that this wisdom could not be come by at man's hand or by human power, but only from thee, O God, immediately or immediately, and having always a great regard, and care to beware of the filthy abuse of such as willingly and wittingly did invocate and consult in divers sort, spiritual creatures of the damned sort, angels of darkness, forgers and patrons of lies and untruths. I did fly unto thee by hearty prayer, full oft, and in sundry manners, sometimes cringing unto thee, mightis lucem duam et veritatem duam quo me ducant, etc. Rabbi Zedni Alman. Then he goes on to say that his slight experience with two different persons has convinced him of God's wish to enlighten him through his angels. He has heard of a man, accounted a good seer and scryer, a master of arts and a preacher of the word, and through his means he has seen spiritual apparitions, either in the crystalline receptacle or in open air. He hopes to have help from this person until, after man or means are sent him from on high, but Saul, for it is Saul he means, is not devout, sincere, and honest. Evil spirits have come to him, much to day's terror, but that thou didst pitch thy holy tent to my defense and comfort. He has quoted Saul Roger Bacon's warning to wicked devil callers, but the man cannot rebuke, and is angry at being further debarred from the mysteries, which were the only thing I desired through thy grace. He begs most humbly and deprecatingly for leave to note down the actions and asks that Anael may come to his help. Barnabas having proved so unreliable, he rejoiced at having found another scryer. The one accessory wanting, when all the table and sills were complete, was a showstone. These seemed already to have owned several. He had used a crystal before this time, but a new one was desirable. One evening, toward sunset, a little child angel appears standing in the sunbeams from the western window of the study, holding in its hand a thing, most bright, most clear and glorious, of the bigness of an egg. Michael, with his fiery sword, appeared and bade day, go forward, take it up, and let no mortal hand touch it but thine own. Michael tells them, too, that he and Kelly are to be joined in the holy work, united as if one man. But one is to be master, the other minister, one the hand, the other the finger. They are to be contented with their calling, for vessels are not all of one bigness, yet all can be full. Day is reminded that all his knowledge is more wonderful than profitable, unless thou art led to a true use of the same. Another spirit, Medicus Dei, or Medicina, says, great are the purposes of him whose medicine I carry. and on one of the early March days utter some remarkable words on the precious doctrine of the universality of the light. Your voices are but shadows of the voices that understand all things, the things you look on, because you see them not indeed. You also do name amiss. We are fully understanding. We open the eyes from the sun in the morning to the sun at night. Distance is nothing with us, unless it be the distance which separateth the wicked from his mercy. Secrets there are none, but that are buried in the shadow of man's soul. Iniquity shall not range where the fire of his piercing judgment and election doth light. Calvin had been dead but 20 years, but with his scheme of election and eternal reprobation, they had no affinity. His mind was far more in harmony with the ancient Hermetic teaching that medicine healing was the true road to all philosophy.